Good afternoon to our professor and to my fellow classmates. This afternoon, I am going to share with you my report topic about standardization, destandardization, and purism in English. So the objectives of this report is that we are going to define the standardization and destandardization. And we are going to explain the process of language in standardization, and we're going to explain as well what is linguistic purism. So let's have this first definition. Language standardization is the process by which conventional forms of a language are established and maintained. Standardization may occur as a natural development of a language in a speech community as an effort by members of a community to impose one dialect or variety as a standard. Another definition: standard language or standard variety is the variety of a language which has the highest status in a community or nation and which is usually based on the speech and writing of educated native speakers of the language. According to Trust, defines standard language as the variety of a language considered by its speakers to be most appropriate in formal and educational context. Let's have another one. A standard language is generally used in government documents, in the news media, and in literature, described in dictionaries and grammars, and taught in schools and taught to non-native speakers when they learn the language as a foreign language. According to Department of Linguistics, they states that in actuality, a language does not have one standard dialect, but instead has many different varieties of what people consider to be the standard dialect. What ties these different notions together is prestige. Socially speaking, the standard dialect is a dialect of prestige and power. However, the prestige of any speech variety is wholly dependent upon the prestige of the speakers who use it. So it is very important to realize that a person's use of any particular dialect is not a reflection of his or her intelligence or judgment. Linguistically speaking, no one's dialect is better to anyone or more correct or more logical than any other dialect. This is according to McManus, Stolen Work, and Zheng Sheng of 1987, page 353. So, if we're going to have it, standardization is a process by which a dialect is made into standard language. According to Hudson, standard language is the result of a direct and deliberate intervention by society, and this intervention is called standardization. For a language to be standard, it has to pass through the following process. So what are the process of standardization of a particular language? So let's have first would be what we call the selection. Selection is a particular variety that must be accepted by society as the one to be developed into a standard language. This requires the variety to be socially and politically powerful. Variability is a fact of life for almost all languages. There are different regional dialects, class dialects, and situational varieties. Standardization represents an attempt to curtail, minimize, if not eliminate, this high degree of variability, according to Stadler. The easiest solution seems to be to pick, although not arbitrary, one of these varieties to be elevated to the status of the standard. One of the existing dialects is chosen for standardization purposes. The chosen dialect is likely to be one spoken, be the more powerful, and better educated groups living in or near the capital. Now, what would be the criteria for a particular selection of a language? So it should sound prestigious. Second, it should have a large number of speakers. Third, it should somehow matches with other dialects of the same language. The second process is what we call the codification. They fix grammar, elaborate dictionaries, and modernize the spelling system and the way they should be sounded. So, the norms and rules of grammar use, which govern the variety selected, have to be formulated and set down definitively in grammars, dictionaries, spellers, manuals of styles and texts, and other forms. The selected dialect is provided with a written grammar and a dictionary so that it can be used in official documents in schools and learned by foreigners. This is according to Holmes 2001. And the third process is what we call the elaboration of function. What will be the function of the standardized variety? Whether it will be used as an official language, national language, provincial language, regional language, and the likes. This is the very stage where the domain for a standard language is selected, such as where it will be used. Like, for example, the parliament, the educational institutes, churches, and others. And the last one, or the last stage, is what we call the acceptance. The variety selected has to be accepted by the population as the variety of the community. Once a language becomes standard after going through the above processes, it serves as a unifying force for the state. This is the fourth and final stage of standardization where we promote, spread, establish, and enforce the standardized variety. According to Holmes 2001, this is done through institutions, media, agencies, authorities, such as schools, ministries, establishments, and others. Now we ask the question, is standardization of language good or bad? So what do you think, my dear classmates? So let's have this. It is good because it allows the language to serve as a model for everyone in community to agree upon in order to communicate. Second, we can have common, mutual, comprehensible language that unifies the members of community and makes the language easier to teach in schools or for foreigners. Now, what's the difference of standardization to destandardization? So definitely it would be the opposite of it. So accordingly, I'm going to quote, the established standard language loses its position as the one and only best language. Thus, Fairclough 1992 proposes that the democratization process can lead to a value leveling that will secure access to public space for a wider range of speech varieties. Such development would be equal to a radical weakening and eventual abandonment of the standard ideology itself. So we're going to think that if the language is being devalued or it's being weakened, maybe that is what they call the standardization of a language. So I'm going to share to you a particular research study. So the title of this study is Language Standardization in General Point of View from the University of Jabal Jaipur University, Indonesia. So in this particular study, from these points, we're going to see the four advantages of language standardization. First, it allows the language to serve as a model for everyone in the community to agree upon in order to communicate. The second one is that having a common, mutually comprehensible language unifies the members of a community. And the third one can be employed to reflect and symbolize some kind of identity and can also be used to give prestige to speakers. And the last one, it also makes the language easier to teach in schools. Now, from these points, therefore, it can be stated that the language standardization has four main positive effects towards the speaker of that language. First would be language model, two, the unifier of people, three, the identity, and the third one would be practical in teaching. Okay, so we also have what we call the disadvantages. First, it creates a sense of elitism among the speakers of the standard and a feeling of inferiority in those who continue to use the non standard form. Second, it tends to create an inferiority complex among the low status speakers. And third, also forces parents who wish for their children to be accepted by the dominant group to conform to the standard variety, possibly neglecting the language and culture they were born into. So, based on this explanation of disadvantage mentioned above, it can be said that the advantages of language standardization are much concerned with the elitism, inferiority, and neglecting. So, in the conclusion part, I just highlighted some parts of it. It is a symbolical marker that distinguishes who belongs to a group and who is outside the group. And also, it encouraged people to develop pride in the language or loyalty towards it. Another part in the conclusion, it should equally take a role to achieve it and recognize it as an individual and mutual responsibility. Standardization is much more concerned with the written language rather than the spoken language. For instance, in the phonological language features. So that ends about the standardization of the language. We go now to the second part of my report, which is purism in English. So in linguistic purism, the definition, linguistic purism or linguistic protectionism is the practice or of defining or recognizing one variety of a language as being purer or of intrinsically higher quality than other varieties. A purist is someone who expresses a desire to eliminate certain undesirable features from a language, including grammar errors, jargon, neologism, colloquialisms, and words of foreign origin. Let's have a recap or a recall of the history. So, according to Inkhorn, term controversy during the 16th and 17th centuries. And on the 19th century, it was advocated by Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy, as well as there is an attempt to make English more accessible without classical education by Sir William Barnes, and it was supported also by George Orwell by 20th century, and the term English coined by humorist Paul Jennings in 1966. So, linguistic purism was institutionalized through language academies, and their decisions often have the force of law. The perceived or actual decline identified by the purists may take the form of change of vocabulary, syncretism of grammatical elements, or loanwords. So linguistic purism is a form of what we call the prescriptive linguistics. The unwanted similarity is often with a neighboring language whose speakers are culturally or politically dominant. The abstract ideal may invoke logic, clarity on the grammar of classical languages. So let's have the proponents of purism in English. First, we have what we call John Check. I don't know if I pronounce it right. So he was against the overborrowing of Greek words into English and supported English linguistic purism. And then also we also have Gerald Manley Hopkins and also William Barnes. So he called for the purification of English by removal of Greek, Latin, and foreign influences so that it might be better understood by those without a classical education. So that ends my report. Here are my resources. Thank you so much for listening to me.